good. Very good.
From the age of 10, even before I'd ever seen the ocean, I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist. Growing up in Northern Virginia, I was inspired by my idol, Jacques Cousteau, as I watched him swim in the world's oceans on TV. I was most fascinated by the kelp forests, and I couldn't wait to see one. I got my scuba certification at the age of 16 at the local YMCA, and I did my first open water dive in a rock quarry in Haymarket, Virginia, which was nothing like diving in a kelp forest. Kelp forests are known as the rainforests of the sea. More than 800 species rely on them. They grow to be 150 feet tall. They sequester carbon, they produce oxygen, and they're considered one of the most important ecosystems in the world. 10 years later, after I'd gotten my degree, as a full-fledged marine biologist, I moved to Southern California, and I couldn't wait to go diving in a kelp forest. Unfortunately, this is what it looked like. I was too late. By this time, according to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, 80% of Southern California's kelp forests had disappeared. It takes a lot to collapse an ecosystem. This took 100 years of urban development, decades of overfishing, a strong El Nino, but it started with the extermination of the sea otter. Sea otters eat sea urchins, and sea urchins eat kelp. All of these stressors added up, collapsed the ecosystem, and the kelp forest disappeared. But as destiny would have it, in 2002, I got a job to restore the kelp forests of Orange County. Yeah. After a few years, due to funding shortages and layoffs, I had to start my own nonprofit organization called Get Inspired in order to finish the kelp restoration project. And through that program, I taught 5,000 students how to grow kelp in their classrooms. I recruited and trained 250 volunteer scuba divers to remove the sea urchins and plant the kelp on the reefs. The kelp had been gone for 20 years, so it was unlikely to return without human intervention. But we did it, and this is what Orange County's kelp forests look like now. This is a great example of a community-based ocean restoration project, and it was very impactful. It was one of the most meaningful things I'd ever done in my whole life. It was bigger than me. It was bigger than any individual or student involved, and it inspired me to continue to do this work. Even today, a decade later, I see the volunteers and students involved with this project, and they say, "How's our kelp doing?" That's important. That's meaningful, because that means they owned that project then, and they still feel that ownership today. We know that's meaningful because we know that people only protect what they love, and they love that kelp. I also learned a very difficult lesson when doing that ocean restoration project. I learned that getting ocean restoration permits is really hard. It's really hard. I had to get permission from 8 different entities to plant the kelp in the ocean. And there is no clear pathway in California to getting ocean restoration permits. I had to jump through the same hoops as someone who was building a pier on the beach. I even had to lease the reefs from the state of California to plant the kelp on. This made me ask a very important question. Why is it so easy to take from the ocean, but it's so hard to restore it? We're going to come back to that question later on. But first, I'm going to share a couple other community-based ocean restoration projects with you. Probably the biggest effort underway in our oceans right now to restore surrounding our coral reefs. From the Great Barrier Reef to the Florida Keys, NGOs, scientists, and passionate citizens are trying to figure out how to help our corals. They are banking their DNA, they're genetically modifying them for thermal tolerance and resiliency, and they're working feverishly to try and restore our dead and dying reefs. People from all over the world are stepping up to help, and Florida is leading the charge here in the United States. People are even taking their vacations from work to go and help with coral reef restoration projects. The next example involves the Chesapeake Bay, which is near and dear to my heart because I grew up near the bay in Virginia. It covers almost 4,500 square miles and was nearly a dead zone in the 1980s due to agricultural runoff, excess nutrients, and the collapse of the oyster population. But the farmers of the surrounding area, the surrounding states, scientists, NGOs, and passionate citizens all started to work on the solution. They're rebuilding the wetlands and the living shorelines. They are reducing agricultural runoff, and any citizen with access to a dock or a pier in the bay can volunteer to raise oyster larvae to restore this critical filter feeder. This pathway of everyone working together to solve a problem is the way forward, especially for ocean restoration. Now, as we saw in Southern California, it takes a lot to collapse an ecosystem. The marine heat wave of 2015, also known as the blob, if you remember, caused a collapse of the Northern California kelp forests. They've lost 90% of their historical densities. The situation is dire, and we watched from Monterey to the Oregon border. The ecosystem degraded and the sea urchins' populations exploded. But passionate scientists, NGOs, and very concerned citizens all wanted to act. They ran into a familiar problem, however: permits. There's still no clear pathway in California to get an ocean restoration permit. These groups signed petitions, went to commission meetings, petitioned their city councils, and they battled for 2 years just to get a small-scale urchin removal permit. They're still battling this today to bring attention to this literal natural disaster underwater. So I ask again, why is it so easy to take from the ocean, but it's so hard to restore it? Now, I have nothing against fishing. This is my fishing license. But did you know that in 2 minutes or less, you can do it on your phone right now, you can go online and pay $65.32 and get a fishing license that enables you to take from the ocean 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But it takes 2 years to get an ocean restoration permit? There's something wrong with this thinking. And it's time for a paradigm shift. We need to change our relationship with the ocean. We need to make restoration as normal as taking from the ocean. I'm going to say that again. Restoration needs to be as normal as taking from the ocean. On Arbor Day, every year I used to go out with my dad and plant a tree. Wouldn't it be cool if on World Oceans Day we could go out and plant kelp with our kids in the ocean? I asked AI to imagine what that would look like for me. And this is what I got. So how do we get there? How do we make ocean restoration normal? Well, paradigm shifts require change. And change is really hard. And government change is really hard and slow. So the governments of the world have the insurmountable task of regulating and conserving our oceans. When we want to roll up our sleeves and do something to help, they need to give us guidance and permission. Go tell your regulatory agencies and your state legislators that we want to see restoring the ocean as normal as taking from it. Tell them you want to see more restoration projects approved. Tell them you want them to partner with NGOs and scientists and concerned citizens who care enough to want to help the species in the ocean that need our help. And I encourage you, go volunteer. Go get involved with organizations that are doing restoration in the ocean. Whether it's removing invasive species from a local wetland or volunteering at your local fish hatchery to help restock salmon in the waterways. We can make a difference if we work together. I've seen it firsthand, and it's truly inspiring. Thank you.